Hi, I'm Gwen and this is Sharon, and we are both from IMBA Interactive. We are 2 out of 3 co-founders of this game audio company. Jeremy right there is our third co-founder. We specialize in sound effects, music, voiceover, and implementation for video games, and we are also part of the game audio community globally, and we also are part of the game community locally. The interesting thing about IMBA is that we are probably the only studio in Southeast Asia that we are an outsourced studio. So we are not freelancers, we are not in-house audio people, and we consider ourselves to be an outsourced in-house team. So, like, when you look at this, is it a paradox? What does it mean to be an outsourced in-house team? I mean, like, we are dealing with many other projects, and at the same time, we try to be as in-house as possible. So what does this mean? Let me pass the mic over to Sharon and she'll share with you in its most simplistic form what this is.
So before we go into the deeper stuff, I'll be talking about my experience in Taipei Game Show. The Taipei Game Show is a 48-hour activity where people from all over the world will gather in different locations doing up a game in 48 hours. So I had the privilege to work with 2 teams. Both of them very different from each other. One is the technical team, one the creative team. So for the technical team, I had to act like the audio director, giving them keywords, trying to put them on the same page so that I can move forward, because they start with core mechanics first. They don't start with storyline, they work a reverse way compared to the creative team. For the creative team, they already had the storyline, they had the era of the game, so there was boundaries where I could research, and I was more like a follower instead of a leader inside the team. So, talking about these 2 teams, why am I talking about these 2 teams? Because in IMBA Interactive, in our experience, this would pretty much sum up what we do with different clients over the 3 years. And these 3 main points is something that we're going to touch today.
So let me first start off with creative ownership. Who does it belong to? When we talk about creative ownership, it's not really about a tug of war of like, oh, IMBA, we are the audio team, we should give like all the audio direction, and then it's not about our client. No, it's us because we are the game designers and creative director. It's actually more of a spectrum rather than a tug of war. And a spectrum of either extremes, there's no good or bad. So over here, we have a few of our clients that reside on all over the spectrum. We have Masquerader by Witching Hour, we have Mr. Cat by 7 Quark, Dream Defense by Altitude, Tian Tian Wangzi by Enjoy Play, One Upon Light by SUTD Game Lab, Holy Potatoes by Daylight, Zenkoi by Landshark, Gancheong by Mojo Cat, Dr. Panda Games, and Wakfu Raiders by Gumi. So, yep. So anyway, as you can see, it's just so broad, and like, again, let me reiterate that there's nothing wrong with being on either. It's a big spectrum that like we all share because it's a joint effort. So let me just zoom into Dr. Panda. Dr. Panda is an established games company that has probably about 20 to 30 games under their belt. And these are some of the titles that they have, some of which we've worked on. When we talk about creative boundaries, let me first start off with the sound team. The sound team's responsibility is to determine what are the constants and what are the variables. So the constants are things that are completely out of our control, and this is something that the team can choose to define on their side. For example, Dr. Panda being an established IP, they also have an established target audience, which is children. Yep. Their characters are established, being Dr. Panda as the protagonist and his merry friends, the cat, the hippo, and the cow. Yeah. And because they have a very tight deadline, their deadlines are fixed because maybe they make like 4 to 5 games in a year or 2 to 3, it depends. And because their team has been working on so many games, they have quite a fixed implementation pipeline on the programmer side. And they also have a music composer. For us, the variable is that there's a mix of art. Sometimes there's 2D and 3D art, and this thing sometimes like makes us consider whether our sound needs to be 2D or 3D as well. And of course, the themes are different. For example, Firefighter is very different from making candy. And I think the most important thing about our experience working with Dr. Panda is that they have many different game designers, because every single project, we could be working on 2 2 or 3 projects at one time, and each project has their own like game designer or product manager, and we have to liaise with all these different personalities. And I think it was a great joy for us to see such a diverse bunch of people under one name.
Yep.
So, on the other end of the spectrum,
There is 7 Quark, Mr. Cat. That is their recent game that they are coming up with. They're also here, so you can also take a look at that. They are quite different from Dr. Panda. They have many IPs, and one of the things that is very different is that they don't. We had the privilege to be very flexible in their team. We, of course, with boundaries as well. We first start off with references, one reference for the atmosphere and the music for the game. Then eventually it became the full space was given to us for our creativity, and we could actually shape the game because of the trust that was built. In terms of timeline, comparing to Dr. Panda, it's also very different because when we first started out this game, it was maybe 100 stages. But as time goes by, they had the publisher coming on board, and things changed. We expanded the game. Even for music, they didn't have the whole storyline yet. I composed one piece, and then after that, after setting the mood, the storyline was coming out slowly. It was a consistent progression. Yeah.
okay, so that was creative ownership. Now we want to talk about shared knowledge, pre-production. Why do your annoying sound designers ask you so much questions? One hand is there's no such thing as too much information. There is a reason why we are asking all these questions. You know, we ask like, oh, when are you going to finish this? Why is your character doing this? What's happening in this scene? And I don't know, some developers also share relationship problems, but I don't know, it's like if you want to share. Like. But anyway, an example is Masquerader by Witching Hour, which they have a booth over there as well. And it's a huge, huge RPG. And it's quite common practice for the sound designers to go through the script. And even though it's 500 pages of script, we go through the script. We go through like when the instruments are being brought up, when are they being played, how the environment is being described. And all this is important research for your pre-production, for your sound design team.
So let's talk about some basic things that we want to touch on whenever we meet a developer. These are some things that we ask. I will go into one question. 2 questions. Where is the developer team based at? Well, this question may seem very simple and may not be that important, but with our experience, of course, when we first started, we worked locally, and then all the developers that we worked with were from Singapore. So there was already that common ground, and it wasn't very hard to understand where they were coming from. But as we progressed, we had Taiwan game developers, we had China game developers, so it changed a bit. We had to ask questions like who were the audience they were reaching out to. We had to research on their cultural background. Not that we're trying to like dig their backgrounds, but to understand what type of games they are looking at in their country. Yeah. So for budget, this is a very touchy topic, but it's also very important for us to ask this question right from the start so that we can know we can find out solutions together and create a better game.
So about technical basics, aside from the usual file size, budget, etc., and where is it going to be developed on Unity, Coco Studio, Unreal? And it's important from the start to determine what your audio tools are. For most indie games, I think it's quite okay to do to code the audio engine from scratch within Unity. But I think it depends, even if it's a casual game that's maybe a 3 or 4 development timeline. If your game has something more complex like interactive music, you might want to consider other plugins like Fabric or even Wise, you know, because Wise and Fmod, both of these middleware, do have indie licenses. And obviously, if your game is like handling 2,000 lines of dialogue and like 20 tracks of like interactive music, then you probably will want to invest in like a middleware as well. Milestones is something that can either be defined by us or be defined by the team. Yeah. I think, for example, Masquerader is very different from a team that develops between 3 to 4 months because it's like 1.5 years of development timeline. And because of that, you need to be extremely disciplined on what your own milestones are for both your own team and the sound design team. So for Masquerader, we actually use festivals, game festivals as our milestones. So every time there is PAX, every time there's GDC, when they want to push out a vertical slice, the sound team follows with the art team and the design team.
Okay, so we've gone through the basics, and I'm going to talk about the soul of the game. We're going to go deeper. For creative direction, how do we go about doing this? Sometimes we need to understand from the developer what type of game they are trying to do. For example, let's say if you're doing a childhood game, the developer is doing a childhood game. I need to ask questions regarding his childhood. It's a little bit creepy, but it's important because it is in relation to him. And he wants to reach out to people that has that same relation. And it's important to ask that question. So there's also another example. Let's say a FIFA game. The developer wants to reference to a FIFA game. Why is that so? Is it because they want to reach out to FIFA audience, the FIFA targeted players? Then we will go in the direction of finding something that is similar to the music. Maybe that's they use certain interesting instruments in the music. Maybe we need to take that instrument out and also put it in their music so that it relates to that group of audience. Moving on, there's also the part where sometimes developers also do not want any reference. It might be totally abstract. And then we will take the direction and we'll give them options before we move forward.
Next is getting to know the team. Who are the sound designers going to liaise with? Are we going to liaise with the creative directors? Are we going to liaise with the producers or game designers? Like even if you look at something as like general as a programmer, there are so many different programmers in the team. So if a team has like 4 programmers, one programmer could be dealing with AI, one could be dealing with lip sync, another one could be dealing with tools. So it's important for the sound designer to go to the correct people in the team so that they can get the right information from the right people. It's also important to know if your team, your production team is going to have any other outsourced audio people. So like a VO producer or another composer, and like just hook us up with these people as soon as possible so that we can work out a system and a pipeline that can deal better with things like interactive music or how dynamic do you want your dialogue to be. Your company's branding and culture, this one may not seem important, but like the game is inevitably influenced by the games that your team plays. So for example, if they play a lot of like Baldur's Gate or they play a lot of Dragon Age, Skyrim, Bioshock, it's like you will want to reference these games' sound effects because this is what they're used to listening to. Use that as a base, and then when you're ready to push the limits, then you push the limits. Okay, so next up, we want to talk about pipeline. Previously, we talked about pre-production, which is all the why, what, whatever. Now is the how. How do you do it? There's 2 kinds of pipelines, production pipeline and communication pipeline. So obviously for most game audio production pipelines, and this relates to both freelancers and in-house audio people as well, we first have the source. The source can be recorded, it can be recorded ambience, voiceovers, sessionists, etc. And then you pass it to the sound designers to edit and manipulate. That is your source. And then you have your first draft. Next up, you want to put it in version control or asset repo like Drive or Git or Perforce, and then put it in the game engine. The process of putting it in the game engine and getting it to behave the exact way you want it to behave is called implementation. And sometimes, of course, you have middleware bridging the gap. So once you test it in the game, you will want to keep iterating, because like sometimes you know, as the sound designer, you know what it sounds like outside of the game, but within the game, it can sound very different in the space. For example, in Unity, you can set your reverb zones, or you want to set like how it transitions from one scene to another, and these things can only be tested in the game engine. And then you, so on and so forth, you have draft 2, draft 3, etc.
So now that we've talked about audio cycle, we'll be touching on the slides that we talked about last year. Last year, we talked about one-way communication. Sometimes it's quite hard to escape from this pipeline, because if you first start with a developer that's new on the team, no trust is developed yet. So we will see these sort of pipelines. But as time goes by, relationship progresses. We get to know people on the team, and that results, from our experience, it results in a better product and a better team effort. And the players feel it too. So for pipeline, of course there are many pipelines, but this is the simplest pipeline that we can think of. It can mean that you are a one-man show, you are an indie developer, and you are working with a freelancer, an audio freelancer. It can be on a one-to-one basis. Yeah, but it can be complicated as well.
So I think our experience as a in-house outsourced team, both Sharon, me, and Jeremy, we acted as audio managers. So every project, just like the one that we mentioned, Dr. Panda, right? They have their own project manager. We also have our own audio project managers, and we also can be the sound designer. We also can be composers. But the bottom line is there needs to be a manager to manage all the assets that are being generated by us and to manage how it sounds like in the game. And initially, as Sharon mentioned, if you first work with this company, you might have to always go through the producer, like always go through the creative director. But as you gain trust, or if their company is not as hierarchical, you can go straight to the programmer, you can go straight to the game designer, and more often than not, this is more efficient because like your communication is just like that. It doesn't have to go through so many layers. But of course, out of respect for the role of the producer, always keep your producer in check of what's going on. Not in check. In the loop of what's going on. Always learn how to use the CCs in your emails correctly. And easier said than done. So far, all we've been doing is just talking about theoretical stuff. I mean, even though it's based on our experiences, like it may take some time for you guys to relate to personally. What's important is keeping the pipes clean. Why are we talking about creative boundaries? Why are we talking about pre-production and all that? Because we want to manage expectations between both the audio team project manager and the developer. We don't want a situation where the developer comes to us 2 days before the game publishers and asks us like, why couldn't you do this for me 2 months ago? And then the audio team will go to the developer and the developer's having a holiday because like this really happened. Basically, the developer was having Easter holiday, and like I didn't even know they had Easter holiday in their country. And I just went to bug them like, why can't you? No, I didn't phrase it in why can't you, but it's like, can we have the build? So I sent several emails because for audio designers, we need the updated build as soon as possible so we can keep our audio files in check. And it was quite insensitive of me because like I didn't know that they had this circumstance. And as much as we try to be efficient, we also must understand that we are all human beings. So for between individuals, and this is what we practice within IMBA as well, these are 4 main traits that we try to have between ourselves and between our clients. Promptness, honesty, clarity, be kind. All these things are important to ensure that it's not only efficient, but it's also based on understanding.
Yep. So in summary, heal the world
Make it a better place.
for you and for
Okay,
me.
Anyway,
So, in summary, we really need to know the creative boundaries. Of course, knowing the constances and the variables are very important so that we can move forward with the right expectations. There's no such thing as too much information because the more we know, the easier it is to get things done and get a polished product.
it's also important to establish and tailor a production and communication pipeline that fits individual projects and team because there's absolutely no one-size-fits-all strategy. Because ultimately, the sound designers are also part of your development team, and the end goal is to create a successful product that is published and that we can all feel proud of.
Yep.
Okay, that's all.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Hi. I used to be a graphic designer, so when I deal with clients, so clients say like, okay, I want to design, I want to have a design something like this, and I have some vision something like this. It could be easily shown. But for sound, so I was wondering because most of our works are we're doing it outsourced. So how to properly say that okay, this game is something like that? Could you say like ka-ching, something like that, and then you do some sound effect your own, and then because we have no in our our perspective, we have no kind of like examples or something that could show. If you say like this could be a quite nostalgic, sound effects and all the stuff. So how to
You're talking
how to
about
do
sound
it?
effects, right?
Yeah, as a client, yeah, how to ask you to find
Sound effects is a little bit harder to
for
capture,
yeah for
you
scores
know,
as well.
but there's a way for music as well. It would be easier if you look in like YouTube and then or the games that you have played before you relate to, you take that and then you give it to the audio designer if you don't know how to describe. But if you can describe like maybe an environment, maybe it's in a place. You tell them the place and then let them be able to relate to the main source so that they can go and research on their own. The easiest way to have everyone on the same page is sometimes going into concepts, not doing the whole game first, but maybe at the prototype phase, the audio designer is already on board so that he or she can prototype a very light build. And then you see it for yourself whether or not this is the direction that I want to go. Yeah.
I think basically searching for references is a collaborative effort. It's like we don't expect the clients to fully know what they want because most of the times they don't know what they want as well in terms of sound. So it's a joint effort. Sometimes all they can provide is words like I want this to sound goofy, I want this to sound a bit more like this and that.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's also us giving the YouTube references. For example, you can provide, sometimes we provide like 10 videos and then we'll be like, okay, this sound effect from video 1, this song from sound effect from video 2, etc., etc. So it can be like a jigsaw puzzle that you piece together.
Hi, how are you? So I've worked in sound design on and off, more in short film and television and stuff in Australia, and I started composing for games about 4 years ago. But my question is more in regard to sound design, and I'm just wondering. I mean, obviously, there's the editing and the treatment of sound and all that in in your Pro Tools and in your other post production suites, DAWs and blah blah blah. But I'm just wondering, how important would it be for someone like myself who's really interested in getting right into sound design within games? How important is understanding, I don't know, like coding and dealing with assets within the software? I'm just wanting to know what you think about that and the kind of balance of the roles and stuff.
To be honest, we are not trained programmers. Like we don't know how to code tools from C# from scratch. Obviously, it would help, but some basic knowledge of scripting would help. For example, JavaScript. I mean, we send ourselves to Unity class to code in JavaScript just because it's useful. Because it not only helps in the language, but it also helps in the logic flow. When you start implementing your sounds, you need to stop thinking so much like an artist and more like a programmer sometimes. And some might argue that even thinking that way is also a creative process. How do you find, like for example, we use whys, right, for a creature that's like dying. Do we bake in the roar, the roar, the dying roar with the Foley sounds of him falling down into one sound asset, or do you want to split it up? So what we do is that even right before we produce the sound, we think about how to split it up, with the assumption that we're going to use middleware to implement it. So for us, it's like one Foley sound of the guy falling down and maybe 8 different kind of roars. And with the raw sounds, the 8 different kind of raw sounds, we put it in a random container where they randomize every time it plays the event, but the Foley sound is always the same. So it plays on top. And from there, you can even set like delays and triggers. So for example, if I want the fall sound to happen 0.5 seconds after the falling sound happens 0.5 seconds after the raw sound, then that's something you have to think about. And yeah, these decisions you have to make. Do I want to bake in stuff? How far do I want to split? I went to EA Burnaby like maybe 5 years ago, and like they were talking about the basketball, basketball foot squeaks, something as simple as a foot squeak, but like it's so much work and thought put into it. Like sometimes they even calculate the angle of the foot squeak, what kind of pitching algorithm is being done, like depending on like whether it's like 45 degrees or less and all that. So how deep down the rabbit hole do you want to go? So all these things are important. So the logic is important for this.
For a start, like there's activities that we do in the company, like for ourselves. Like when we love watching people playing games, and then we also love YouTube has like so many like playthroughs, and you actually can listen to the game itself. Like how did they do this? This is really interesting. How is it that everything is not peaking when there's so many sounds? Or why is it that I don't feel sick of the sound? It sounds different all the time. Yeah, so when we play games, we actually start to ask ourselves questions and learn along the way. Yeah, it's quite important to play games.
Yeah, and attempt to reverse engineer it in your mind. How did the implementation process do this thing?
Do you do adaptive music as well?
What do you mean by adaptive music? Sorry.
Because you compose, right, for games?
Yeah.
Yeah. Adaptive music is designing music within a game that triggers in different ways.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you.